Okay, great. So we are going to continue picking up where we left off last time. For those of you that weren't here last time, we were covering Matthew chapter 7, verse 13 through 14. And it's talking about the straight and narrow gate. I think we only had time to cover verse 13 last week, if I remember correctly, because it was a very short, condensed study. We were talking about the narrow gate and the straight gate. In fact, why don't we just go ahead and read that right now? Can we have a volunteer read Matthew 7, verse 13?
Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Megan, for reading that. So here Jesus is speaking, and we talked about what Jesus is telling us to do. Okay, so we also, I really appreciated last week, we talked about observing the text, and you guys gave me your observations, and that was very good. We want to continue to foster that. We want to continue to help develop that habit of observing the text, any given text in the Bible, and seeing things that you otherwise would not see unless you really did take special attention to those details. Okay, so let's do that now. For those who were here last week, great. This will be a recap for you. For those who weren't here last week, this will be brand new, but this is going to be nevertheless a good exercise. Okay, so let's take a look here. Jesus is telling us in this text, what is he telling us to do? What is clearly the imperative, the command that Jesus is telling us to do here?
To enter in the narrow gate.
To enter into the narrow gate. Okay, now some versions say straight. Straight means narrow. Okay, so enter into the narrow gate. Okay, and so before he even talks about why we should enter into the narrow gate, before he even tells us what that narrow gate is, I don't even think he tells us what the narrow gate is, but he says enter into the narrow gate or the straight gate. But then what does he focus on right after he says that?
The destruction. The wide gate will lead to destruction.
What is the destruction is what's the end result, but what leads to destruction?
The wide gate.
Okay, the wide gate. Okay, so notice what Jesus is doing here. He mentions the narrow gate. He says you should enter into the narrow gate. He doesn't take time to describe what the narrow gate is, but right away he focuses on the opposite of that gate. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah. So right away he goes right into the opposite. He says enter into the narrow gate. Okay, great, Jesus. Yeah. Okay, what is the narrow gate? But he doesn't tell us. He doesn't expound on that. He goes right into the opposite of the narrow gate or the straight gate. He says for wide is the gate. So this is this the same gate or a different gate?
Different.
Definitely different, right? So wide is the gate. And also we see so far he's mentioning a straight gate, narrow gate, but also he adds something with the wide gate. What does he add?
And it's broad.
What is broad?
The gate.
Okay, gate is broad, but what else is there? There's additional information added to the wide, broad gate that is not in the straight gate. Do you notice that? What additional information does he add, and he pairs along with the wide gate that is not in the straight or narrow gate?
Yeah, it leads to destruction.
What leads to destruction?
The path of the wide and broad gate, the way of the wide gate.
Yes, using the word that Jesus used. Yeah, the way. Okay, but it's not the what kind of way is it?
Broad.
The Broadway. Broadway,
yeah, the Broadway.
Right? Not New York Broadway. Okay, but Broadway, right? So it's interesting. He mentions two gates, right? Straight gate,
yes.
Wide gate, but he also adds along with the wide gate, he mentions broad is the way. right? So he mentions the wide or broad gate, but he also adds additional information, doesn't he? He adds also the broad way, right? Yes or no? Do you see that?
Broad is the way.
Broad is the way, exactly, right? So he first mentions gate, and then he mentions the way. Yes or no?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So he mentions the wide gate, and then he mentions the broad way.
Broadway.
Okay. And furthermore, he adds additional information. He adds where that way leads, right? That way leads to
Destruction.
destruction. Okay. So it's interesting. What do you think comes first? Gate or way?
The way.
The gate, because you can't get in.
Okay. All right. So Retta's saying gate. Vic, you're saying way.
Yes.
Why do you say way?
Well, we have to go by the good way or the bad way before we get to the gate.
Okay. So based on what Jesus is mentioning here, in order of how he mentions things, what comes first?
In order, he mentions the gate first.
He mentions the gate first, right?
Yeah.
And then he mentions the two gates.
Yes.
Right? The opposite gates. And then he mentions the way.
Yes.
So could we conclude that the way that Jesus mentions this in its order kind of shows a progression?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So what's the progression? What comes first?
From the way the Bible's written, the gate comes first, and then the way.
The way comes second.
Way comes second.
And what comes after that?
Destruction.
Destruction, or the end result of that way, where that way leads, right?
Right.
Destruction. Okay. Do you see that?
Yes.
That progression. So what would come first? I'll repeat my question. What comes first, the gate or the way?
Gate.
It has to be the gate, right? I know it kind of seems like there's a way that leads to a gate, but then what Jesus hones in on the very beginning as of importance, as an imperative, enter in to the strive gate. Strive to enter at the strive. Sorry, I'm getting my text mixed up. Enter ye the straight gate, the narrow gate, right? And the wide gate he mentions as opposite to that. And then he adds the broad way. And then the broad way where it leads.
Yes, to destruction.
Right? Now, but then, it's like Jesus in this passage, he's fixated on one thing. In this one, what is he fixated on? And how you can tell what they're fixated on is based on what they choose to focus and describe more of.
Right. The destruction, the broad.
Okay, so he's focusing more on
the
wide gate, the broad way, and the destruction, right? And also, what else does he mention?
Many go in.
Many will go into it.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Right. So how many go into that gate?
Many.
Many.
It doesn't give us a number, but it says many.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is many a lot or little?
A lot.
Oh,
It's implying a lot.
Right.
So he doesn't say few, right? Few would be the opposite of many, I would think, right?
Right.
He's saying many there be that go in it. So in other words, so just collectively review what Jesus is focusing on here. He's saying, enter ye in the straight gate, right? He says, enter ye in the straight gate, but then he focuses on, predominantly on, right? The wide gate, the broad way, where it leads, destruction. And how many people are on it? Many, or many that go on it, right?
Yes.
So Jesus is fixated on this. So the question, let's pause for a minute. Why do you think Jesus is fixated on this?
To emphasize what will happen.
To emphasize.
So that we don't go down that way. So we don't choose the broad gate, the wide gate. that many Jews, he's telling us to listen to what he's having to say about going the narrow way.
Okay. Okay. So in a way, he's using this as a means to emphasize
Right.
how important the narrow gate is. So in other words, it's kind of like a setup. It's kind of setting up. He said he mentions the narrow gate, enter ye this narrow gate, but then he focuses on the wide gate and the wide way and the destruction and where it leads and how many are on it. Right.
Right.
It's almost as if he is trying to convey that presently many people
I think he's using it
unknowingly
as a warning, like just
many
warning you.
people unknowingly are on that path.
Mhm.
And I think that if you saw something narrow, you would think the wide one would be easier to find.
Right. And
Mhm.
it's easier, right? So people choose the easier path.
Right.
And the easier path is not the good path.
Right.
Is not the path that you want to be on. Because it leads to destruction.
Okay.
Right? Now, verse 14. We didn't get a chance to cover this last time. So now we're moving on. Verse 14. Someone read that for us.
Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it.
Okay, so now
Strait is
what is he focusing on?
On the narrow gate.
He's focusing on the narrow gate.
You get teeth off of get your gum off of your teeth.
Okay.
Stuck on your teeth.
So the first verse, Palmer, we can hear you. So if you can mute yourself, that'd be great. So the first verse, verse 13, is talking about Jesus focusing on the wide gate, the broad way, and where it leads, right? And how many are on it, right? So that's how many things, how many details. The gate, then the wide way, where it leads, and how many people are on it. That's four details right there, right? 4 details I see, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 details I see in verse 13 regarding the
gate.
Wide gate.
Yes, the wide gate.
Broadway, right?
Yeah.
Verse 14, it says, because it's straight is the gate and narrow is the way. So again, do you see that? He mentions the gate and then he mentions the way. Do you see that progression? Yeah?
Yes.
That same pattern, right? Same pattern. Straight is the gate, narrow is the way, which leadeth unto where?
life.
Life. Okay, so this is different, opposite, right? Different outcome based on the different path, different gate.
Right. And few find it.
And few there be that find it. So it also shows you how many people.
One had many, one had less, one had destruction, one had life.
Exactly. The contrast. You see the contrast? Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So this gate is described how?
Difficult.
Narrow and difficult.
Okay, well, let's just focus on the gate. What does he say about the gate?
Straight.
Narrow.
It's narrow. Okay, it's straight. Okay. How is the way described?
Broad.
Difficult.
Is it broad? Is it difficult?
No, difficult.
Difficult.
Is that what your translation says?
Yes.
Your translation says difficult.
Yeah, I'm using the new New King James.
New King James. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. King James just says narrow. Narrow.
No, it
Well,
says narrow
mine
and
is
it says difficult.
because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it.
Yes, I understand. That's the New King James Version. But King James Version says straight is the gate
Okay.
and narrow is the way.
It's kind of because you're saying straight is the same as narrow. Look like it would have said narrow is a gate. Narrow.
Right. I mean, it seems redundant, but when you look at the actual Greek words for straight, is stenos. If you look at the Greek word for narrow that the King James uses, it's thalibo. Two different words, slightly different, but meaning the same thing. But both convey this idea of narrowness, right? Narrow could also, in this case, be very well difficult. Okay, yeah. So I'm not dismissing that. I'm just going with what the King James Version says, and I appreciate the other versions bringing that different usage of that word. Okay.
Right. So then here's my question. So to dissect the Bible and to understand it, by what version do you go by, and which version do the Seventh Adventists go by?
Okay.
The New King James, which one?
Okay.
King
Yeah, that's a good
James.
question. I first of all want to say that I use all translations
Okay.
to my benefit. Okay.
Sure.
To better
Yeah, that's good.
expound and understand, like, the overview.
Right.
But when I do a deep study, I actually stick with the King James Version.
Oh, King James.
Because the reason why I do the King James Version is because the King James Version is, and the King James Version is not the only version. I'm not saying that it's like the version that you should, put above all else, but that version and others like NASB, that version and the King James Version, others like it, they are very close to the original Greek and Hebrew. In fact, if you use what's called a interlinear Bible, interlinear Bible actually connects every word in its manuscript, word for word, with the Greek and Hebrew equivalent. So you get the actual translation word for word from the Greek and Hebrew manuscript, and you can check it that way. You could check it parallel, side by side, through those translations, and King James is one of them. And so if you use Blue Letter Bible or any other Bible app, you'll notice that when you do the Strongs or do the concordance, it connects each word directly to its Hebrew or Greek equivalent. Okay.
Wait, is it equivalent or origin?
It's the same. I mean, it's the parallel. It's the original manuscript of the Greek and Hebrew that it connects, right? So when I'm doing a study, to get an accurate study, to get an as accurate as possible and as doctrinally sound as possible, I stick with King James.
King James. Okay.
Yeah. But and I also refer to through the Hebrew and Greek interlinear, that actually also gives more insight to the structure of the text and how it's grammatically structured. But that's what I stick with for study. Now, am I saying that that's like other translations are not good? No, I'm not saying that. There are times where those other translations aid me as well to better understand the text, right? So I'm not saying that one version is above all else, but I'm just saying that to be a responsible Bible student, it's good to know the actual, as close as accurate to the original manuscript as possible, right? To get the responsible, accurate rendering of what a text is saying. But I appreciate, like, for example, like instead of saying narrow, some people say difficult. I appreciate that. Okay. And that helps, and we can definitely go with that. But if you want to get to the real meaning of the word, it's really important to go to the actual Greek word or Hebrew word for that word. So I won't go too much into that, but good question. So this way, so the gate is described as what?
Straight.
Straight. The way is also described as?
Narrow
or difficult, right? Okay. Now the word thalibo, I did have it on my notes. I thought I didn't. Okay. The word narrow, which some of your translations render it as difficult, it actually, thalibo, the narrow way, this is describing the way that Jesus is talking about. The narrow way, thalibo, is actually translated as press or compress or contracted. And this is the word thalibo is often used as a metaphor to describe trouble, affliction, or distress. Interesting. Right? So the path, the narrow way, what makes it difficult is because that you're pressed. You're compressed. You're contracted. You're experiencing trouble, affliction, and distress when you're on this path. It's no wonder few people want to go on that path. And Jesus is bringing this out, right? So the question is this. Jesus tells us, enter the straight gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And how many people are on it?
Many.
Many. Okay. Now, here in verse 14, he says, straight is the gate, narrow is the way which leadeth to where?
Life.
Life. And how many find it?
Few.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. What is the straight gate?
The narrow.
And
follow his
why
commandments.
did Jesus tell us to enter into the straight gate?
Until it leads to life.
So it leads to life. He wants everyone to have life, for sure. We know
Yeah.
that. But what is the straight gate? What is the straight gate?
Follow his commandments.
Okay. So the question I'm asking right now, let me ask you this. Does Jesus in this 2 verses tell us what the straight gate is?
No.
He doesn't.
No.
You can't find the answer of what the straight gate clearly is. Jesus does not spell it out for us. He doesn't say, okay, everyone, this is the straight gate, yada, yada, yada. He doesn't tell us that, does he?
No.
But Pastor Troy, may I interrupt? Can I say something?
Sure.
It's just I'm just thinking of you know how it says straight is the gate, narrow is the way, and leadeth to life. I'm thinking of John 14:6. Jesus says unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father but by me. So I think of even going to other Bible verse is John 14:6. Jesus is the way. Jesus is the life.
I appreciate that. Is there another comment?
So if Jesus is the way, right, means you have to have faith in Jesus and to follow, and if you love him, to keep the commandments, right?
But it has to be, it says here something you find. It's not, it's hard to find it.
Right.
And
So that's a very good observation.
Some
That's a
kind
very
of
good observation. Yet it is hard to find.
yes.
That's what Jesus said. Okay. Now, I appreciate you bringing the way into it, Lee. But I think what we need to do before we venture out to those other texts, is we need to try to stay in the context of what he's saying.
Okay.
Because yes, you could easily think like there's a word way. So like, you'll pick up many other verses that refer to way. Could they connect to this? Yes, possibly. But is it a direct connection? It could be, but it's kind of, you might have to, explain some ways to get there and find other connecting verses to get there. And I'm not saying that that's not possible. I'm not saying that that's not a connecting verse. Okay, but what we want to do is we want to see the implications of this, because what Jesus is telling us is he wants us to go where?
He wants to go to the narrow gate.
He wants us to go to the narrow gate. He wants us to go on the straight way. But he says it is what?
It is difficult.
It's difficult, and it's few that find it. Okay. And so the question is, when he's giving us this information, we got to ask ourselves why. Why is it hard to find? Why are few people finding it? And of course, Jesus, we believe he's available to everyone. Yes.
Yes.
He's readily available to everyone. So it shouldn't be hard to find Jesus. He's only a call away, right?
Right. Yeah, that's if you want.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, but is that what he's saying? Is he saying the way is him? Okay.
Yeah. He
And it
doesn't.
could be, but what we want to do is we want to really get what the Bible's saying. Okay.
Pastor Joy, can I?
Yes.
And you said that it was hard to find. Where is that in the verse that you're
Verse 14.
reading through?
The
And it's
last,
just hard to find because it says, few there be that find it.
Yes.
Is that the same as hard to find?
Yeah.
only a few find it. That means it must be hard. It's not where you can just.
Or that people are not interested?
Yeah.
That could be too.
Now,
So see what we're doing right now, because sometimes Bible has not enough specific details. It puts us in the realm of speculating and trying to apply or find an application.
right,
But we need to be sure about it.
right,
Not just meandering around what the answer could possibly be. This is where a lot of people make mistakes.
right.
All right. They kind of speculate and they think, oh, this is what it means. And so they try to explain it away. They try to rationalize it away. But when you do that, what you're doing is you're now trying to use human reasoning to explain the word of God. And what you need to do is put that aside and let the word of God itself explain it for us.
And that's
Okay,
kind of what I was talking about, because I didn't see it was hard to find in that verse. So that's what I was referring
Okay, some
to.
translations say some people say that it's difficult that they find it. So I'm just going by what other translations say. But in the King James, so what you're saying, few be that find it, you're kind of putting on a presumption. What's your presumption?
No, I'm trying to not put on a presumption by not really understanding why some are saying it's hard to find when it doesn't say that in the King James Version.
Okay, gotcha. Fair enough. Yes. Okay. Sticking straight to the language, sticking with just the language of the text. Very good. Okay. So what we got to ask ourselves is to help us to understand what the straight gate is, right? We got to understand what that straight gate is. Is there anywhere else in the Bible that Jesus mentions a straight gate other than this text?
Luke 13:24.
Exactly. Luke 13:24. That is the key text I was looking for. Very good. So what you do when you're asking that sort of question, you just look up where else is straight gate mentioned. Type in straight gate, you'll see another text. And to be within the context of what Jesus is saying, it's Jesus saying it as well in Luke chapter 13, verse 24. Right? So that's key. That's a connecting verse right there. Because it's the same speaker saying the same topic, talking about the same thing that could apply and relate to the previous passage. So Luke chapter 13, verse 24 is the next text that does mention the strait and mentions the gate. And it also mentions the amount of people. Okay. Now, someone read that for us. Luke 13, verse 24.
Strive to enter through the narrow gate, for many, I say to you, will seek to enter and will not be able.
Okay. So what is Jesus saying here? What's the imperative?
You strive to go through the narrow gate.
Strive to enter into the narrow gate. That sounds like Matthew 7:13, where Jesus says, enter ye at the straight gate.
Yes.
Right? He says enter in that previous verse, Matthew 7:13, right? But here, what does he say?
Strive.
He adds something. He says, strive to enter. Is there a difference?
I mean, yes, it is. It implicates that you got to try over and over again to be able to encounter the straight gate.
So in other words, it's not just enter into the narrow gate like the previous text, right?
No.
Here he's saying strive to enter.
Right.
Is there more of a compelling push here?
Oh yeah, it's more of a yes.
Yes. right? Yeah, how else could you say it? Yeah, but
Well,
he's saying,
motivate is kind of a motivational word.
yes, it's a galvanizing word. He's trying to,
Yeah.
you know, get people to do this, you know, strive.
Right.
Don't just like, you know, merely passively try to enter the gate, but strive,
Man,
right? Strive
Yes,
to enter the straight gate. Yeah.
yes, yes,
Now
definitely.
get this. What does he say after that?
For many, I say to you, will seek to enter and will not be able.
Okay, so let's get this. How many will seek to enter in?
Oh, many.
Many.
that's the same many in the broad gate.
Yeah, and it's like many in the broad gate, right?
Right.
The word many is used in the broad gate when it's saying many will be on that gate that leads to destruction, right? But he says in that previous verse, Matthew 7, verse 14, he says, few be that find the straight and narrow gate. He says few. So this is interesting. In verse 14, Matthew 7, verse 14, and Luke 13, verse 24, it seems like they are both kind of, there's a disconnect there. It seems like a contradiction there, right? Because he says, the straight and narrow gate in the way which leads to life, few be that find it. He says, few will find it. Yes or no?
Yes.
He says, few will find it. But here in Luke chapter 13, verse 24, he says, many, right? So how do you make sense of that?
Because
He says,
looking,
few will find it. But here he says, many.
be looking, but not find it.
Trying to do it
Well,
their
you know
own
what
way.
though?
I don't think it's
Many,
about finding
says,
it. I think it
for
says
many
that
are
they seek to
seeking.
enter in.
Right.
Trying
What-
to
says-
find it
But
their
shall
own
not
way.
be able.
What does seeking mean if you're not trying to find something? If you're seeking, what is that then?
Your seeking is like trying to find it, trying to seek the
No,
Lord out.
Oh, he said
No,
no.
no, no. What is it? You're looking at seek, the word seek, isolating it from itself, Retta. You got to look at what are they seeking? What is seeking connected to in verse 24 of Luke 13?
the gate.
The narrow way.
They will seek the word seek is connected to entering in,
And,
Yes.
right? That
Oh, yeah,
seeking is
yeah.
connected
Well,
to,
yes, yes.
they're seeking to enter in. Okay, it's not seeking by itself, isolated from itself. That word seeking is seek to enter in its context. Okay, because like there's many examples of this in the Bible where people try to enter in.
right.
Jesus told a lot of parables of people trying to enter in, but they were not able to, like the 5 foolish virgins.
Or the camel
The eye of the needle.
through the eye of the needle, and just for some reason it is reminding me of that.
The wedding feast, the story of the wedding feast,
The
where
wedding feast, yeah.
Oh,
people were not able to enter
At the wrong garment.
in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he says, strive to enter the straight gate. So again, my question, before he says, few
Is strive and seeking different?
there be that find it. In Luke chapter 13, verse 24, he says, many will seek to enter in, but not be able. So how does few suddenly become many?
Is seeking and striving the
well,
same?
they're not.
Hmm?
They're not the same. They're different. Because
How
the
are they
few
different?
will make it, but the many will look for it. They will seek.
But in that previous text, it says many will be on the way that leads to destruction.
Right.
Right.
So those who are seeking are not striving.
Okay, those who are what was that again? Say that. Those who are what?
Those who are seeking are not striving. We were talking about striving.
Okay. Okay.
So if you're seeking, you're not striving, or it's harder seeking.
Okay.
Well, yeah, in a way, it's when you strive to get somewhere, you have to do the necessary steps to be able to achieve the entering of the gate. To seek to get in, you perhaps are you have a misconception on what are the requirements to enter the gate, because it takes effort to get into the narrow gate.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's why only few make it. And
All right.
that much.
So the previous text, Matthew 7, says that many will enter the wide gate, while it says that many will seek into the straight gate. While here it says many will seek to enter the straight gate. Okay. Previous text says that many will enter the wide gate, while here it says many will seek to enter the straight gate. But the same previous verse says that few there be that find the straight gate, Matthew 7, verse 14. When Luke says that many will seek to enter in. So there seems to be a contradiction here. Okay.
No,
it
not
says
really.
few there be that find it. Luke says many will seek to enter in, but will not be able to. So how can many enter the straight gate if few can find it?
It seems like in the broad gates, you don't have to seek. Seem like you could just walk in there.
We're not talking about the broad gate. We're talking about
I
narrow.
know, but when you were saying what was the difference? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So how do we make sense of this? I mean, verse 7, Matthew 7, verse 14 says, few will be that find the straight gate.
Right. Many will try, but only few will make it.
It doesn't say many will try. Where are you getting that?
Okay,
It's
right.
interesting
Many who find it. I mean, few who will find it, but many will seek it.
If you compare this with the wedding feast, there were many. First, the Jews were invited, and later on, of course, they went to the highways and byways, and it was filled. There were many in there, but once they were in there was an examination. Those who had the righteous robe, the righteousness of Christ on them. So apparently, there will be many who will enter into Christianity. But if they are examined to see whether or not they have the robe of righteousness, I think that's how we can reconcile it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, that's exactly what conclusion I came up with as well, Palmer.
Right. Okay.
Because I think this is talking about waves.
Right. Okay, I get you now.
Like the first in Matthew 7, verse 13 through 14 is the first of two groups, right? Those who enter the straight and those who enter the wide, right? The second is for those who do find the straight way. Okay, the few that do find the straight way, excuse me, and what Jesus says for that group that did manage to find the straight gate,
Eternal life,
right? So it's like the story. The way that I can see this, it's like the story of the wedding feast, like Palmer said, Matthew 22, verse 1 through 4. The invitation went out to everyone, right? But they refused.
Right.
They mistreated the servants that were delivering the message. They even killed them, right? And the king punished them. And then the invitation went out to the second time to all the street corners and invited all the bad and the good. And so then they come to the feast, remember?
Yes.
And when they come to the feast, the story continues. Although they're at the banquet, there's a man
who didn't put on the gown.
Remember the man? Although he entered in and he made it to the banquet hall, but without the wedding garment. And without the wedding garment, he was thrown out. And it's interesting that parable in Matthew chapter 22, verse 1 through 14, ends with a haunting message. The parable ends by saying, many are called,
But few are chosen.
but few are chosen.
Right.
So it's the same thing with the 10 virgins. 5 were wise. They were able to come in. The 5 were foolish. They sought to go in, but were not able to. So what you see is like, there's literally a narrowing down process.
Oh, yeah, filter.
Yeah. There's literally a narrowing down process. So with the straight and narrow gate, there seems to be the same narrowing down process where, number 1, many will go through the wide gate. Number 2, few will find the straight gate. Number 3, the few that do find it, even among them, few will go in.
Wow.
So when we think about what is the straight and narrow way, could this be the straight and narrow way? The narrowing down process. And to understand the implications of what causes us to be filtered out, what potentially could get us filtered out, we need to study those parables.
Yeah.
What disqualified them at the very end? What disqualified them to enter in? And we need to study that. And so, although the Bible doesn't tell us what the wide gate or the straight gate is, it doesn't tell us what the broad way or narrow way is, but it tells us where it leads. Right? But let me ask you this question. If someone enters the wide and broad way, and they're treading that way, are they lost? Are they lost?
Seem so. Yes.
It would seem so, but why would you say that?
Because they're choosing the broad way.
Okay, they're choosing the broad way, so there's no way of turning back. They're just
there is.
They're just gunning for that.
Yes.
Destruction.
Okay, so if they're on their way, they're doomed to destruction. They're predestined for that. Is that true?
Unless they get off.
Okay.
Well, no, because you right. Well, I mean, just like
let me ask you this. Let me ask you this question. If you enter the straight gate and you're on the narrow way, are you immediately saved?
No.
Do you experience everlasting life immediately when you're on that way?
No.
No, because it has to
be filtered.
They all, each path and each gate has their appointed ends.
Yes.
The ends are not experienced when you enter or while you're progressing. Could you at any time?
But they knew they were going the right direction. The virgins knew they were going the right direction. They
Question is, could you at any time turn around?
Yes.
And head back to the other gate?
Yeah.
And the other way?
Yes, because you have freedom of choice.
Isn't that what repentance is?
Yes.
Right? Repentance is what? You
turning away from your way.
Change the direction of the way you're going.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So, just because you're venturing on a path, or somebody seems to be venturing on a path towards destruction, you don't write them off as saying, "Oh, they're lost."
Right.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, doesn't that coincide with the thief on the cross?
Yes, it definitely does.
Yeah.
It coincides with every character in the Bible who has gone wayward, but turned back. It also coincides with everyone that were supposedly on the path of the straight and narrow way, but they went to the other path.
Right.
Right.
Wow.
So notice both gates and both ways are leading towards their appointed ends, but the ends are not experienced while you're progressing. Right. So the reason why I'm saying this is because oftentimes those of us that think we're on the narrow and straight and narrow way, we could be very judgmental to those who are not.
Yeah, definitely.
And we could automatically think that, oh, they're bound for hell. Like, and you treat them as such.
Wow.
And you accept that as their destiny. But you need to be careful of yourself too, because you may think that you're on that path, but you're really not on that path as you think. Because it's, what does Jesus say? Many will be that want to go, but few will be that will enter in. So we have enough to worry about on our own. We got to worry about our own responsibility as, am I being on that path myself? But at the same time, am I doing what I can to save others with a winsome, Christ-like way?
Right.
Right. It's not about you. It's not about your own salvation. It's not about you having that peace of mind that I'm saved and too bad for them. Right. And we need to change that sort of idea and thinking.
Well, we need to change that selfishness.
Yeah. That's right.
Because honestly, when something occurs or whatever that's a negative for others, we're like, whoa, I'm glad it's not me.
Right.
And for we ought to pray for them and hope for them. And because like life is a round table. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. You don't know what may come around. I didn't mean it to rhyme.
Yeah, that's fine. No, that worked out. No. So.
I would just have to say, if I was a virgin with the oil, I would have been sorry for the other ones, but I would have been happy that I had it. In the selfish realm of life.
At least you're honest.
No, yeah, I mean now
I don't think it's selfishness. I think it's more relief.
Yeah.
A sense of relief that at least.
You hate to call people to follow you. Like you said, we have to examine ourselves. You hate to people, come on this way. You're always examining to see if you're in the right spot.
Yes.
I think Romans 3:21 has something to say in terms of what we're talking about, this robe of righteousness. It's the righteousness of God. It says in the King James Version, Romans 3:21, therefore, by the deeds of the law, Romans 3:20, the text I'm looking at, I have to look it up again. Apparently I lost it. But basically it's saying this: the righteousness of God is revealed without the law, but it is witnessed by the law and the prophets. In other words, we don't keep the law or believe in the prophets to be saved, but because we are saved. In other words, those who say they are followers of Christ should walk as Christ walked, through the indwelling of his Spirit. And the indwelling of his Spirit will guide us to the 10 Commandments and the prophets of God. By the law and by the prophets, if they speak not according to this, it's because there's no light in them. These are the two witnesses that witness that we are on the right path if we have these as revealed in the life of Christ.
What I really want to emphasize and focus on is when we talked about the parable of the wedding feast. The wedding feast was a very good description of this filtering, narrowing down process of the guests that made it, and they were there, but then even those who were there did not make it. And what made a difference? It was the robe.
Amen.
The robe of righteousness, and that robe represents Christ, right? And so, what we can see is that staying on the straight and narrow is not easy, in the sense that few be that find it, based on what we see Jesus is saying here. Few will seek to enter in, but will not be able to. Everything that we're talking about, right? Our own destiny hangs in the balance based on how we understand how we're trotting this path. What path are we trotting, right? straight and narrow, what we noticed that straight and narrow is definitely one of those paths that is difficult. It's not easy. It's not the broad way where everyone wants to go. Everyone wants to go, but it's the opposite of that. And so for us to be able to understand what that means, it has a lot to do with us understanding what it means to follow Christ in a way that involves self-denial,
self-sacrifice,
and when
dying
you're
to flesh.
as narrow as the way gets, right? And somebody mentioned the eye of the needle, right? This is exactly the concept here. It's, you got to relinquish yourself of everything.
Yeah.
Everything that you are, everything that you
I do to
associate
this
with in
world.
this world that you identify with.
Mhm.
All those things have to be stripped down to your bare essence of who you are. It's like till you're almost like I picture the narrow way as you're walking through a crawl space. It's so tight that you can only walk through it sideways.
But there's
And-
so much of the world in us that there's no room for Christ.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so much not just the external stuff that we cling to, but it's
Right.
also internal things that need to be chiseled away in our character and our hearts. And that's what the narrow way, that's what fits us for the narrow way. Right. And so, you know, one commentator says, it's like a stripping away of everything, like worldly lusts, things of this world, the things that we are attached to, self-denial, taking up the cross, right? And this is the way that we're called to go, and it's the way of Christ. He's our example. He trotted this way before us, and he asks us to come and follow him. And following him, like, remember when Jesus told the rich young ruler, he said, sell all you have, give to the poor, and come and follow me. What Jesus is telling this young man to do is he's literally telling the young man to go on the narrow way. He's literally telling him to divest himself of all that he has and follow him, right? And then Jesus uses the example, it's easier for a rich man to enter the eye of a needle than, it's easier for a camel to enter the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. And
My God.
and then that's when the disciples said, then who can be saved? Right.
Right.
And that's a very good question. Who can be saved if that's the case? And
What was the
Jesus
response?
says, with men, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. So how can we be sure that we will be on that straight and narrow path? It's all completely divesting yourself and relinquishing everything of yourself and depending entirely upon God every step of the way. And we need to understand what that means. And that's why we need to study passages like this and other parables that are connected to this, to understand this in a deeper, practical way.